wanted to achieve. Um,
Can I ask what started? I mean, before we get in, if you can give me if there's such a thing as a short answer, why start the podcast?
I think we've always, I don't know if everybody else does this, but we've always spoken about sex. Like, I know that in my circles, whether it be at campus or off campus, there's always a discussion about sex. And I think people saw me as the crazy person talking about sex all the time. And then one day, there was a young girl who asked me questions, and my aunt, who is like 50 plus, was in the same room. And I answered the question and I gave examples, and I was like, people are different, our anatomy is very different. And I think from that day, I was like, I think I need people to know information, because even my aunt, who was 50 plus, was like, oh, she didn't know that. And I was like, oh, people obviously need to know this. And I hope that I could create a space where people could come and ask questions and also find out things. And that's why I basically started it. Yeah. Thanks. So, Ms. Blake, I would love to know about you, who you are, what you do, and then where in South Africa are you based?
So, thank you. You can call me Casey. Ms. Blake is very formal. I am a registered counsellor. I'm based in Edenvale, Gauteng. It doesn't feel like it's outside of Joburg, but technically it is. I have been one of those crazy people my whole life too, which is why I smiled so hard when you said that. I've just always been okay talking about sex, and people have always come to me with questions, and I would go find out answers because I don't know. And in my many earlier years, I would pretend to know and then find out information later and feel terrible about the misinformation that I had spread. So I've started working in sexuality in 2012, but I've been studying it since my honors. So the reason I went and studied psychology was because I wanted to be a sexologist. And in this country, there is no legitimate way to become one. So I went into the psychology route, did not get into masters the first time around, get a B-Psych equivalent program after my honors, and then have been a registered counsellor ever since. But my honors research was on sexuality. In fact, who do you talk to about what topics and how comfortable are you? My master's research, when I went back and did a research master's in psychology, was on how did you find your sex ed and did it help you make any decisions? Spoiler alert, terrible and no is the general answer. So I've been really interested in sexuality and sex ed as topics for the longest time. In 2014, I created a series of workshops for parents called Tools for Having the Talks, where I help parents with very age specific. So it's like parents of nursery school, parents of junior primary, parents of senior primary, and beginning of high school. And we have conversations about what is appropriate according to the international guidelines, which are all research based. So what is it appropriate for your 3-year-old to know versus your 7-year-old versus your 10-year-old and 11, etc. And how do you, as an adult who's never had this information before, figure out how to have these conversations? So the workshops are my passion project. And I'm currently in the middle of a series because it's a 3-day workshop series. So this weekend, I'm with parents of 7 to 10-year-olds, and we are doing the second of 3 workshops.
Wow, that is amazing. Oh my word. I have a younger sister who is almost in that age bracket. That would be so useful. I'm going to tell my parents about it.
You're welcome to.
Because my sister came home to me the other day and asked me, what is this? And I was like, how do I tell her this?
Stabbing your vulva puppet. Does yours have a name? So many people have named their vulva puppets.
We finally named it Gina. Miss Gina. I call her Miss Gina. That is amazing. Wow. So I guess I am so happy at the moment. I'm so sorry. So I guess we'll just kind of then just jump into the first question of many, trauma and sex and mental health. So I wanted to know, how does trauma as a result of sexual violence translate into our definitions of views of sex, and then also into our sex lives? Because I know that in the beginning of my podcast, my very first episode was sexual trauma, because I thought that you would have to start with something that is really terrible, something that was really crappy, something that was happened in history, because normally sexual trauma is something that happened in our history. To go back to that place and be like, this is what kind of shaped or informed my view of sex or definition of sex, and this is why I get my definition of sex from, and then from that, it then shapes how we see sex from little for adolescence or from adulthood and then further on. So I wanted to know, how does that impact sex now again as adults?
So this is a very complicated question. It's not as simple as it looks. And there's a variety of reasons I say that. And I think that because we live in a world, and particularly in a culture where rape culture is so rife, I don't know if many people know the difference between rape and sex as a starting point. One of the reasons I say that is I was in a group supervision years ago, and we were talking about how sex can be a really great way to relieve anxiety. Like, if you don't have anxiety around sex, sex can be a great way to relieve anxiety and frustration and other kinds of emotions. And the conversation went in the direction of my colleagues, who we were working at a trauma center at the time, couldn't differentiate between consensual sex, which is sex. It's like, breathing, swimming, and drowning kind of thing. I'm sure you've seen that meme about the difference between sex and rape is that sex is the consensual thing. That's what we call it, sex, and we call it swimming. And it's not non-consensual sex, it's rape. Like, if you're not breathing when you're swimming, you're drowned. It's not the same thing. And the conversation with my colleagues went to, but people who are angry then take sex. And it was, well, no, that's not sex, that's sexual violence. Because sex and sexual violence are two very different things. One is for the purposes of pleasure amongst other things, and the one is an act of domination and violence. The purpose of putting someone in their place, or it's just about violence, it's not about pleasure. So I think one of the reasons, I think I'm answering your question, but in a very Casey kind of way, is that because pleasure is missing in our regular discourse around sex. It's the one thing we don't talk about around sex. Don't have sex, you'll get STIs. Well, why would you have sex in the first place if it wasn't nice? If there wasn't a reason, what's this thing? So when we talk about sex, we need to talk about the pleasurable aspect of it. So in terms of sexual violence, sexual trauma, sometimes there is pleasure involved, especially when there's been a grooming process, when there is molestation. It can be physiologically pleasurable, but that doesn't make it wanted, and that doesn't make it good. And so I think that people don't always know the difference. I've spoken with many clients who, and I'll say male clients who are heterosexual, heteronormative, who in sessions they're like, I had sex with my partner last night and she just wasn't into it. And I wanted to stop and she wouldn't let me. She was calling me names because real men don't stop. So my clients can recognize that this is not a consensual moment. They're not enjoying it because they can see their partner's not enjoying it, highlighting pleasure here. But because of the narratives we have around sex, even heterosexual women don't have permission in their own minds to stop sex when it's not good for us.
No, that is, someone's finally explained it like that in a different light. Because in our country, unfortunately, in our continent, I think the numbers of rape victims are very high. And to hear it explained like that, it's obviously very different. And often I don't think we get to hear that narrative of how the differentiation between sex for pleasure and sex as in domination or anger even. And I think that's really important, especially because we are so impacted, I think, at a national level with just trauma. And I mean, we see it in our newspapers almost every day, children, young women, old women. And I think that's really important. And even seeing those things on the news headlines or on our phones or memes of it, it impacts how we then see sex, how we then see even like how they say men are trash. Like this literally informs how we see people. So I think that was a great explanation. Thank you very much.
I need to come back to it, sorry, because as I finished and as you were talking, I was like, oh, I need to put two little things on top of that. The first one is that this is not a rape apologist situation. There are men who go out and actively rape. They know they're raping, they're taking, they have no regard. And this is not just men, although the majority of rapists are men, with the majority of victims being women, assuming that those are only genders, which is not. So there's the knowledgeable, I'm going to go take it. There's no regard for the person they're having sex with, or having the sex act with, because it's not it's once again, the other person hasn't agreed, wanted anything. There's this taking idea. You cannot, it's just, so I want to be like, although some people are aware of the dynamics, I'm not saying that not everybody. I think what's important for me for that example is that these kinds of clients, these kinds of conversations, they know something's not right and they want to stop and they don't know how to navigate that in their relationships because of the relationship dynamics, which are steeped with rape culture and toxic masculinity and all these ideas about what sex and man and woman mean. And that the second thing is that there's this weird idea around rape that part of rape culture and part of myth is that on some unconscious level, victims want that violation. It's some sort of badge, I don't know. And the reason I'm saying this is because of the general comments you hear growing up, at least I heard it growing up, not always in relation to me, but in relation on media, all the things that we consume, but you're too fat or ugly to be raped. You're too old to be raped. These kinds of ideas confuse desire and attraction and all the things that go into sex and pleasure with this act of violence, saying that even if you come forward and say you have been violated, you're too ugly, God knows what that means, to even someone want to violate you, and that it's actually not got anything to do with that. Old people, grannies get raped, infants get raped. There is nothing here about desirability. This is about violence and not considering other people as actual people. Sorry, I feel like that needed to come in.
Important. Thank you very much. And I mean, I think I like the fact that you said that your clients have identified this heteronormative men, have identified this and said that their partner wasn't into it and they want to stop, and or the woman doesn't know how to say no. And I think that's very important that you highlighted that as women, sometimes we don't know when to tell the person that, hey, this isn't enjoyable or pleasurable. Can we stop? And I think that is a problem a lot of women have. Like, as a young woman who has spoken about sex for so long, and I'm sure my friends think I'm crazy, that has often been a topic of conversation, like in our circles, and that's really important. Like, do people focus and highlight this enough that they know that they can actually say no, and it's normal to say no, I don't want to do this, or I think that's really important. Thank you very much for highlighting that.
Can I add to that? Because my stuff around consent, I mean, you can see I get very passionate. So I can't remember who originally said it or where I originally saw it, but consent is actually about yes. It's not about no. So no does not equal yes is the thing that I've seen so often around sex in sex education spaces. So just because someone hasn't said no does not mean they've said yes. So not only do we need to help people listen to no's, not only verbal, but also just because there's not a no, do not assume that other people are into it. If someone hasn't been like, oh, yeah, I want to, if there hasn't been some form of enthusiastic, hey, you wanna, and the other person's like, yeah, I do wanna, that's how you know it's consensual. Because there's yes, or like, I've never done it before, I'm keen to try, like, like that kind of stuff. But we don't talk about that part of consent. We focus, even in sex ed at the moment, on the no. And I'm sure from your legal background, you're aware of how the no seems to be the most vital part and not the lack of sex. Like, that for me is boggling. Like it's just, how do you not ask that question first? It's not about the no's, because if you can't say yes, your no is meaningless, and vice versa. So also being able to say to someone, I don't actually like what we're doing, can we do something else if that's what you want? But not having to offer that as a shame, this poor person, they really need the sex. None of that nonsense is true. But if you actually still want to continue with the sexuality and the sexual acts, but you don't want to do the thing that's sore or the thing that's not enjoyable, you can say, hey, I am not enjoying this as much, can we go back to that was more pleasurable for me, and have a conversation. The other person can be like, oh, I didn't really enjoy that, can we find a middle ground?
Yeah, I think conversation is also really important in all of this, and it's expositive conversation, I think. I know that obviously it's October is like mental health and everything like that, and this episode will eventually be titled Sex and Mental Health. So I wanted to ask, how does sex impact our mental health, or how does mental health impact our sex lives or our sex, or vice versa? I'm not sure how it will go, but
once again, this is not an easy answer. It's quite a complex and I won't even do the question justice, but I will do my best to cover what I can. So I think the impact sex has on your mental health depends on your relationship with sex, on an individual level. So if you have no anxiety around your own sexuality, if you have pleasure without worrying about sin, all those kinds of things, then there's then sex, when it's good, and even if it's, as long as it's sex you wanted to do, even if it's disappointing, even if it's all the things that happen, it's it's still sex, can be good for your mental health, because there's so much that comes with sex. There's affection, there's intimacy. So many people don't actually enjoy sex, but they enjoy the closeness of the sex. So I've had clients who over the years have come to enjoy sex, thank goodness, because sexual well-being is my goal, but it's not everybody else's goal. And sexual pleasure is my goal, not everybody else's goal. Sometimes there's other things that we need to talk about, but they missed the sex, not because of the physical pleasure, it was that, but they missed the closeness. They missed the feeling of being special or wanted or desired, having someone close. Sex is so much more than just genital action. So much more. There's so many elements to it. So when sex goes well, people feel good about them. Like, all these things are good for your mental health. If you're stressed, if you get to it, depending on where your stress levels are, sex can relieve the stress. Not necessarily orgasm, but the process of pleasure can be relieving, because orgasm is not always easy for everybody, and it's kind of like watching the kettle boil, except eventually the kettle will boil. With orgasms, the more pressure you put on them, especially if they're evasive for you, the more evasive they become. But if you're enjoying the process, that in itself is relaxing. Figuring out what is nice, it's got all these beautiful mental health benefits. However, if your relationship with sex and sexuality is not one where you feel okay, so you feel like something is wrong with you or your sexuality, whatever that may be, for whatever reason, whether it's a physical experience or like whatever, there are so many things that can make you feel like you and your sexuality are not okay, that impacts your mental health. It can add to depression, it can add to anxiety, it can add to a sense of not being good enough as a person, or not a good enough man, not a real woman. Once again, those are not the only two genders, but they're the two genders that have these meanings of sex. So genderqueer people don't always feel the same kinds of pressure to be a certain kind of sexual person, but that doesn't mean that they don't have their own stuff about what it means to be sexual. So chicken egg.
That's so true. Which one? I think that was a really good explanation, because it really depends on how you see sex. What is your attitude towards sex, to speaking about it? Or do you cringe when you hear the words vagina, vulva, penis, pleasure, orgasm? And then that is so true. I agree with that how you see sex does impact your mental health and sex, and you're in engaging in the process and the act thereof. And wow, thank you.
I didn't even mention the big one because it's so obvious, but I realized just because it's obvious to me, it doesn't mean it's obvious to everyone, is shame. Wow, the amount of shame that your relationship to sex can have. And shame is one of it has such an impact on mental health. Yeah, you feel like you as a person are wrong somehow, and that you need to be fixed. It's just, need to add in the level of shame. And it's so much of it is because if we don't talk about sex, or we have these myths, or we have these misinformations that, I want to share one quickly. I'm sure we'll come to it later. But something that I come across so often with heterosexual couples is, if the guy has an erection, the assumption is he needs and wants sex now. And if he does not have an erection, the assumption is he doesn't find his partner attractive. That is such nonsense. Also, erections aren't like this outside of teenagehood. And there's this expectation and so much pressure on erections that so many women have to work through. Am I being rejected right now because he doesn't have an erection? He's got an erection and he doesn't have sex with me? Is something wrong with me? All these things, those are part of myths, because erections are just a physiological response to the world. They do not mean sex now. They are not a demand. They're not even a request. They just exist.
Thank you. That was very enlightening. Thank you very much. And you know what is so funny about that? I think, well, not even funny, just I think misconception of sex. A lot of people, and I mentioned this in a previous video as well, that even today, like you said about the erection, it's something physiological, and that is also visible. I mean, a lot of people ask, do females even react that way, or do females get erections? And I myself can't answer that question because I'm not qualified, but I do think that you just don't see, not everybody sees how things differ from our bodies, and obviously we're very different biologically. But something that like erection to us, a female, a woman, is very different to a man with a penis. And I think, I guess we'll deal with that in another video, how that is very different.
But I can answer that a little bit, is that if we think about what an erection is it's blood flow into the penis, it's engorgement, it's a rush of blood. The vulva has the same thing. The clitoris does get erect. Depending on your physiology, you might notice a visible growth in the clitoris when there's erection. The labia puff out, they become engorged. That is the visual equivalent. The lubrication, which there's so many things that impact lubrication and prevent it from happening, but when there is lubrication, that is literally, on a very basic level, that is the equivalent of the erection. So some people won't even know they're aroused until they touch themselves. Oh, I'm quite wet. I wasn't even aware that I was horny. Because it's a physiological, it doesn't always mean horny. It doesn't only mean horny. And absence of does not mean not horny.
Yes. That literally is the next question. Sex drive. I know that like people, I've read that like depression and bipolar disease and other mental health disorders kind of impact your sex drive and your libido. And I know that some people struggle with that. They feel like they aren't normal, they aren't okay, they aren't, I don't know, a lot of terms they would use to describe themselves, and it's shameful that because they don't feel a particular way, or horny or aroused or erect even, that they think that this is not something that they can just, I don't know, my English is failing, but they just don't feel normal. So how does, again, I know that sex drive is impacted by mental health and vice versa. So how does this libido part of our sex correlate to mental health?
Something that is a little bit unknown is that it's not always the mental health challenge that impacts on sex drive, but it's the medication that manages it. So we've also got mental health stigma on top of everything else. Very different to cholesterol meds, but in very same ways, they help you live a better life. So yes, when people are depressed, if we think outside of medication, when people are depressed, when people do have anxiety or bipolar mood disorder, whatever diagnosis they have, or whatever experience they have, excuse me, I'm very gassy, they let me find my track of thought again before the burps distracted me. That has different impacts on their sex drive, their willingness to be sexual with others, and their desire to have sexual contact. These are very, I mean, they can be separated. They often are separate, but we often don't think of them as separate because they often also happen in one big bundle, so we don't realize that feeling sexual and wanting sexual contact with others are not always the same thing. But it's the medication more often than not that comes at a cost. So depression is horrendous. If you are at a point where you need the medication to help you get better, feel better, I often send my clients to psychiatrists if I feel like the depression is at a point where if we were on meds, we could do the work a little deeper. We could actually get to some stuff because the medication creates space. It doesn't make you numb. It should never make you numb. That's a sign that you're on the wrong meds and something needs to be changed. It's supposed to just help you have a bit of distance from your very violent internal reactions. The ones that tell you that you're shit and like all those things, your intense rage that comes up when your child doesn't want to buckle up. Meds help you just, okay, I would normally quite be upset right now, and now I can see what's happening and I can see that this isn't, like that's how meds can help. And it comes at a cost. And even personally, I've got amongst other things, I've got polycystic ovarian syndrome and I've got premenstrual. Welcome to the club. It's a shitty club. And I've got premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which means without the PCOS, when I am 15 days pre-menstrual, my mood drops quite intensely. But without a menstrual flow, the mood doesn't lift. So my mood gets better the moment my period starts. There's an actual, I know my period is starting today because I wake up with energy. I feel back to normal, whatever normal is for me. I can do things. And now that I'm so, like, the diagnosis has helped so much and just like normalizing my experience and I'm not going crazy. But with the polycystic ovarian syndrome, going 9 months without a period and just keep on getting lower and lower is quite intensive. So I'm on a low dose of an SSRI for depression, and I'm on a contraceptive so that at least my body thinks it's menstruating every month, so that I don't get lower and lower, so that it's much more manageable this way. It comes with a cost. I am not always horny, and I'm one of those people who was like, I could go now. I had a very high sex drive. Always had a higher sex drive than my partners, and now we've had to have I'm married. My spouse and I had to have a conversation. Like, I'm going to go onto these meds so that this part of my life is more manageable, but it's going to have an impact. And how do we navigate our sex life, which is going to go from Casey asking all the time to my partner having to ask for sex, which is unheard of in our relationship. At that point, I think we were 14 years in, and I don't think they've ever had to ask for sex. And now we knew this was going to change. That's how it affected my sex drive. It doesn't mean I don't want sex. It just means I'm like, I suppose I could have. My quality of life, this feels like it's a cost I went into knowing about. So once again, informed consent. I knew the risks. I know what it's like to have PCOS and PMDD without meds, and I was willing to try with the meds, knowing that my sex drive was going to take a huge knock. And I think what's important, and because I had a fantastic doctor who actually brought this up, speak to your partner before you go on the meds. It's going to have this impact. How do we navigate it? How do we feel about the fact that things are changing? And so, because it's going to have an impact. And if your partner doesn't know that you're on meds, they're going to think that whatever we think about, like we always take everything so personally, that the lack of sex requests or initiation is something to do with them and not something that's just going on with you.
Yeah, that is very important. Again, I guess communication and comprehension of communication, I think, is really important in terms of that. Because how do you have that without saying something, without talking about it, and then going from there? Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm not sure the term coming out. I honestly don't know if there's a different term that people use nowadays for it, or if this coming out term is bad or like discriminatory or prejudice in any way. But I would like to talk about the mental health of coming out. I'd like to think that many people live in houses, environments that aren't safe to come out, or they feel stuck in a closet, or like literally, figuratively, and in a closet where they have to keep their sexual orientation to themselves. I just wanted to know, what I want to know before that is that I think, to me, people are in charge and in control of how and when and to whom they come out to. I think that it's really important that people are in control of that, because nobody wants to come out over the internet, or WhatsApp message that someone screenshotted and sent to various people in groups. I think that is very harmful and damaging to that particular person and their mental health, because I think this is an internal struggle a lot of people have. And then for one day you to be hiding and okay, and then the next your whole life is on public view and everybody can see this, and you don't want that. So does that again impact how we then see sex? Like, does that alter your attitude towards sex? Obviously, because that's mental, because then how are you going to see this? Is it going to bring you anxiety, like you mentioned, like, or is it just going to be, it's all the shame again of, okay, I'm going to see sex and myself as dirty and ugly and something that is a no-go area in my life?
So I want to start with talking about heteronormativity, which is the idea that society thinks it is normal to be heterosexual. And it makes the assumption that everybody is heterosexual. So people have to say, sorry, no, I'm not this. And that's what we call coming out. I recently come across a term, and I've been sharing this concept with many of my clients who are in different phases of letting people know about their own personal realizations. And I got it. Oh, I wish I remembered where I first read this. It's one of those things that stay with you and like percolates in the background, and then suddenly it's like, oh. So it's actually about inviting people in. It's inviting people into your reality. It's not coming out of a closet where you've been hiding, although for many people that is the experience. But when we tell people who we are, we're actually saying, would you like to come into my world? Would you like to know the real me? Would you like to know the me where I'm not pretending to be straight? Even if it has no impact on our relationship at all, it just means I don't have to pretend to be something that I'm not when I'm in your presence. So I've been sharing this idea with a variety of clients and getting a variety of different responses. Depending on how you feel about it, coming out might feel more like you're coming out into the world as who you are, or you are letting people know, like, would you like to join? Would you like to come in? Actually, would you like to come into my home where I am just me and I don't have to pretend to not be me? And I think there's something about that. And I think because we live in a very heteronormative world, this leads to a lot of homo antagonism or trans antagonism, or I'm using the word antagonism instead of phobia, although people are more familiar with homophobia, transphobia, because it's not a fear of, it is antagonistic. It is like you're not scared. But in a way, maybe we are scared because and it's not, but now I'm into a completely different direction. So let me rein myself back in. I think that people are scared to come out, invite people in, because we've heard these people make jokes about other gay people. We've heard these people make jokes about other trans people. We've heard these, and you haven't mentioned gender, and I'm not saying that gender and sexuality are the same thing. They are linked, but they're not the same concept. They're actually very different concepts. But the same fears come up a lot, is that I've heard you mock people. I've heard you cut people out. Are you going to cut me out if I stop cutting this part of myself off from you? And despite our constitution and despite our beautiful policies, South Africa has beautiful policies if only we could implement them. But so technically people are safe, but in reality people are not safe. And I think that my mind is getting flooded with too many different ideas, so you're going to have to rein me in on what you want me to answer. Sorry. Okay. This just gets so broad. I just get pulled into all these different things in my mind.
No, I think I haven't. Yeah, you're quite right. I did listen to the part where you said I haven't mentioned gender, and to me that is very tricky, because I myself every day, and in my research for my podcast, I learn every day that there are different types, cisgendered and things like that, and constant terms that I didn't know of existed before, and now know that they are there. And then sometimes even like calling people the correct pronouns, like I am struggling with that. And I've seen lots of memes and pictures about people using water bottles to spray each other to call them the correct terms. And I think obviously because we see heteronormative as the norm, this change where people are different and the whole coming out. And I like the term you're letting them in and not coming out, because that is so different and so true and so new as well. So I don't think people have seen it as people letting the outside come into their world, to their home, their space. And I like that a lot. And I think that is like, I think it's kind of, to me, it sounds safer than saying I'm coming out, or I'm letting you in rather, because yeah, that I just like that a lot, that analogy of coming in better.
And
But
you also referred to, sorry, being outed. That is so violent. Because as you said, this is your life. You get to send the invitation, right? You get to decide who you're inviting into your life, how you're inviting, when you're inviting. This is your life. This is part of your identity. If somebody does that on your behalf, they're taking away your agency. They're speaking on your behalf without your consent. I mean, it's so often we talk to people about, is there, who have you invited in? And as you invite more people in, do you want them to know who is also safe around you? So that if they've got questions, they can also talk to each other without putting a lot of burden on you, but in a respectful way. Not, oh my God, did you hear? Just, but how do I, just have community within this person's world where you can talk about what this news means to you in the most respectful way, without the person always having to hold the burden of, this is what this means. Be like, so I've actually told Keisha all these things. If you have questions about my party, my world that I'm inviting you into, and people can make this request. If Keisha's agreed to do the labor, I've asked Keisha if they can navigate most of these questions on my behalf, and then we can have more conversations. So there's ways to navigate this so you can have allies in your space. But that is different to, me sharing a screenshot or, going and telling people. Like, that's not your story to tell.
It's really not. And I think the mental health around outing somebody, because obviously in your world, you are living this pretense of trying to be something that you're not. And then you seem fine. And then all of a sudden somebody outs you. And I think you then go into a mental state of despair and shame, and then just not wait at all. And then the anxiety around having people around, sharing stuff, you have trust issues. You all of a sudden have all of these, like maybe even anger issues and things develop from there. And then perhaps you go to the lowest point of being diagnosed with depression, or you just sit in that. And then hopefully you are then able to find a safe place or safe people who can help you and support system like that. I think that's really important. And also to realize that outing somebody really does affect their mental health and their mental state, and that nobody should have that over the other person of, I'm going to out you, or I will out you, or that even blackmail of, like, I know that there are so many movies around things like that. And it's just, wow, that isn't very friendly to society, showing them this on like Hollywood stages, showing us this. And that isn't a great message coming from that side of the world, but okay.
I think the thing about heteronormativity is it forgets that there is variety and diversity is normal. It forgets that every kind of sexual orientation, every kind of gender identity is normal. It is normal to be gay or queer or lesbian or bi or pan. It is normal to be trans or binary or non-binary in terms of your gender. That is just normal variety and normal diversity. There is nothing mentally wrong with someone who is not heteronormative. There is nothing mentally wrong. It is not a mental illness. It is not a mental struggle. The struggle is the people around you who have throughout your life commented on these kinds of people not being okay. That's the struggle. Because now you either have to pretend to be acceptable to the people who claim to love you but speak badly about you without knowing it.
Yeah.
Or you have to risk being ostracized by those same people, but being authentic for yourself. And I think that's where the mental health struggle comes in. There is nothing inherently mentally ill in any kind of way with any kind of sexual orientation. That just needs to be put out there.
Yes, that literally is such a great way to go into the next question of, I think this is really, really important, very, very important, in fact, that I'd like to address the question of people asking or saying, can therapy, can medication, can something change one's sexual orientation or sexuality? And I would just, in the same breath of you saying that that is very different and their varieties are normal and that change is okay, people need to know that. To me, I think the answer is no, it can't. There's nothing in the world, no corrective rape, no medication, no program that is going to change somebody, no therapy is going to change somebody and their sexual orientation.
It's part of who you are. And even if you really wanted to change so that you can feel accepted in society, that is not possible. All the studies on conversion therapies have proven that these things have been so harmful to mental health. It's not a possibility. There is nothing wrong with you, therefore there is no need to be fixed. What therapy hopefully can do is help you come to terms with the fact that you are different to what people hoped and what people told you to be. That you don't live your life for other people, even though we always do in real ways. How do we live a real, authentic life where you are allowed to exist as a full person who you are? I mean, people actively search out for conversion type therapies because they really want to be accepted. They don't want to be so different. And that is a indictment on our society of how terrible we as people who are in society are towards things that we don't consider the same as us. And it's on race levels, it's on gender levels, like it's on so many different levels. South Africa's got a wonderfully documented history on hating the other.
So I asked last week for some listeners if they would ask a few questions about sex and mental health, and like we only got like 3 back, but 3 is better than nothing. So I'm going to ask those questions now. I know that one of the questions were, what are some of the myths around sex and mental health? And they said that they recognize that stress is a mental state, but how does sex influence or change this particular state of mind?
So we've spoken about how sex can be relieving, and it's the pleasurable aspect. An orgasm is technically a release of tension. So if orgasm is easy for you or accessible for you, it literally is your body builds up into a point of tension and then it releases. Stress release. That's if that is something that feels safe for you. I mean, especially masturbation, because you don't need anybody else. You just need to be there for yourself. It's the safest sex you can have. You can't get pregnant with yourself. You can't get an STI from yourself. Make sure your hands are clean and you're good to go. Really, use some good lube and you're good. You don't have to, like, it's just masturbation is so important for sexual health, never mind mental health. We haven't even gone there. I'm just throwing that in there. So is there a connection between your mental health and sex? Once again, it goes back to the beginning question, is it's complicated. It depends on if you have anxiety around your sexuality or around your masturbation practices or around your sex practices, and you feel like they are shameful, it is less likely to be relieving to engage in that. It is more likely to be a very complicated experience. So it depends on what sex means for you, and if you've got sexual pain, if you've got sexual trauma, if all that stuff needs to be, like, the sex you're having for pleasure, for release, for stress management, needs to be sex that is accessible and pleasurable for you. You know, there's no need to push through anything when it comes to sex, ever.
No, I understand that one. Thank you very much. It really does correlate to our first question. And I like the second question quite a lot. It has to do with sex and masturbation, but I think the focus here was masturbation. And what benefits does like sex and masturbation have for your mental health? And then also, at what point does masturbation become a crutch where you rely on it so much that you avoid dealing with mental issues or even your day-to-day life, and that then goes with the hypersexuality question. But I think we'll answer that one first. At what were the benefits of sex and masturbation for mental health?
I'm going to take a detour here and answer it also with regards to sexual health. Is that if you masturbate, it means that you know what you feel and look like. Well, feel like at least when things are okay. So you are also able to tell, oh, this feels different. Maybe I should see someone. So from a health perspective, just like we all know that if we suddenly get a freckle we haven't had on our arm before, we want to check it out to make sure it's just a freckle. If something feels different on our genitals, maybe the shaft feels different of the penis, the glands feels different, maybe the labia feel different, there's a sensation, maybe the clitoris, the urethra, or the vaginal opening feels different, or maybe the vagina feels different. Because you know what it feels like when it's healthy, you're able to access health care if something feels different. So just putting the health benefits of masturbation out there is that you know your body. Mental health, I'm going to answer the concerns, is that if your masturbation practices are interfering with daily living, so if you are not able to come to your work, your social obligations, your relationships, if it's interfering there, then it borders on, well, it is something that needs mental health care, not the masturbation itself. It's just part of, it's often a symptom of something else that needs to be taken care of or looked at or given care to. So that's if you're masturbating too much, nobody gets to decide what too much is unless it is interfering in your life. That's very important to talk about. Like if your masturbation practices don't interfere with your work or your employability or with your family life or with like your social life, if your masturbation does not interfere in any of those things, I wouldn't worry about you doing too much. If you're still able to have a healthy, active social life, even however Corona has made that happen for you, because my social life is completely through video at the moment. I'm one of those people. But like social life is active, work life is fine, like all these other things are in check. I wouldn't be concerned about your masturbation. You are enjoying yourself in this world that is so pleasure averse. You are being radical. You are being what the world needs because you're having moments of pleasure in your life.
Thank you. That took a great turn. So earlier on you mentioned like even the question of interfering with your normal life. What is hypersexuality? And then how does that differ? Or where's the line between hypersexuality and sex addiction? Sorry.
I'm not well enough versed on sex addiction and hypersexuality to be able to talk about the line. What I can talk about is how in couples, this is where this comes up. And hypersexual is a term that gets used or thrown at people who have a higher sex drive than their partners. Whether that means you want daily sex or weekly sex or monthly sex. If your partner wants to have sex more often than you, it often gets used. So I've had clients who've come because they've been told they're hypersexual, and they want weekly sex. So once again, your sex drive is your sex drive, and we have to find out where that is with your partners and how you're going to navigate that so that everybody's needs are getting met without consequences, without being like you have to give up more than you've got to give. Once again, masturbation is really helpful. If you've got a higher sex drive than your partner, the beauty about being a person is that you can help yourself. You do not need to have partnered sex all the time. That's why we masturbate. Masturbation in relationships is so healthy. And normal. It's just part of it. So what is hypersexuality? I'm not well read enough on the technicalities, and I don't work with sex addiction, so I'm not well enough versed in that. I can send you to colleagues who are amazing with this for you to interview. But in terms of what is a normal sex drive, it depends on the people, it depends on the person, it depends on the dynamics. It's not so easy to just be like, if you have sex so many times a week, day, or month, then you are normal. No, there's normal for you. My current normal is very different to my normal 2 years ago.
Everybody is different, and we all differ. Like, we all have small things that make each other different, and that's okay. Those changes and differences are normal. So this one comes from me. Obviously, Mental Health Day is on the 9th of October. And we come from this really difficult period of lockdown. And some people have been in isolation alone, and some people have been stuck in their houses with families or big households, or where maybe they felt safe or maybe they didn't, and maybe they have these thoughts and things like that. What can we tell somebody who is currently maybe in this position or is alone, or who is struggling with their sexual identity? How can we help them in some way? Or what can we do to help them? Or what can we tell them to help them in their struggle for their sexual identity?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is you are not the freak you think you are. You are also not the only one. The beautiful thing about Instagram and Facebook and all the other kinds of social medias is that you can find people who are having similar kinds of conflicts as you. I would say reach out, find a social space on the internet, even in the social media. Find people who are also gay, who are also queer, who are also going through similar things. If you can figure out what to search for. If you just look at sex ed, hashtag sex ed, you'll find so many different resources. Scarlet Teen is an amazing resource on the different kinds of normal sexuality. It's a great starting point. I think it's scarletteen.org. They have an Instagram. I'm also very bad with website names. They're amazing. They're an international organization. There's so much information out there. We just have to help you find it. Reach out to counselors and therapists who have a special interest in sexuality. I can almost guarantee that we have heard this before, and that you will not be the first person who walks into our space with these kinds of struggles.
Yeah, that is kind of... and I like what you said earlier on about letting people into your world, not necessarily coming out. I think that's also really important, and finding safe people around you. My very, very last question is, I would love to have your opinion on sex education in South Africa. Are we doing enough? What can we do? And from your professional point of view, what is lacking in? How further can we make changes? And also to reach more young people, and then to eventually create a population, a generation of people who make informed, responsible decisions about sex for themselves and hopefully for their future partners.
I think that the sex ed curriculum that has come into schools, if it is implemented, is a fantastic start. It is more than what most of us got. I think the barriers to sex ed at the moment is the adults. It's the people who are concerned that 10-year-olds should know about masturbation. That, yeah, children masturbate in the womb. There are 3D scans of fetuses holding their genitals and exploring themselves and having pleasure. This is not a thing that happens at puberty only. Genitals feel good to touch. Babies find that out very soon. So how do we navigate safety talk conversations around masturbation at an age-appropriate level? I think we need to do more teacher training. I think we need to do more parent education, because the biggest obstacle for sex ed being properly implemented in schools is the fear that the parents will take their children out of the school. I also I have an amazing colleague who does sex ed in schools that I can let you talk to because they are phenomenal. Like, we're not doing enough, absolutely not doing enough. But I think we're on the way there. We just need to get the adults on board.
Yeah.
They're our biggest barriers to sex ed, and it comes from a good place. They think they're being protective. We think that if children don't have information, then they're somehow safer, but then they can't identify something that's inappropriate. They can't identify something that's wrong, and they don't know who to talk to about it. So many of my clients over the years, you're joining us, have only found out that their childhood experiences were molestation or abuse or rape of a sexual nature because they had a sex ed talk who spoke about appropriate and inappropriate touches. That's how they found out they were being molested. They knew it wasn't right. They didn't even know they could talk about it because these things never get spoken about. So just on a access to help, this is so important.
You said getting the grown-ups on board, and I think a lot of the time it's because there's this taboo about speaking about sex, and that is literally why the name of my podcast is Take It Off, because we want to take off that taboo. We want to take off this whatever chain it is that's holding us back from speaking about sex in a positive light. And people, I know that some people think just because people have access to information doesn't mean they'll do the right thing. And while I think that might be true to some extent, I also think that when you have that information, you still have the logic, the mindset, the whatever it is, to then choose what to do with that information. And then from there, hopefully, like if you are informed, if you are aware of these things, you can go and make decisions that are better for you, for yourself. And I mean, Katrina Buffard mentioned that the Dutch sex education model is centered around joy, consent, and pleasure. And look how different their approach was to sex compared to America and maybe even ours. And I think that we should just give them, people need this information so that they can know, like you said, what is inappropriate, what isn't. Because we can't later in life find out things and then say, oh, and then we shut down. Some adults just don't talk. And I think that's the problem. We need to talk about this. And wow, not that I'm saying it should happen right now, but obviously we wish that it would, so that our sex education...
Sooner the better.
Yeah,
that's why I have workshops for nursery school parents of nursery school children. Because stuff happens. And stuff happens because there is silence. And when we don't have words, we can't speak. Things literally become unspeakable.
That is so true. Thank you very much, Kate.